Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hello and welcome to the Cherish and Conquer Podcast. I'm ready for a really good conversation today because I have Karen Martin on the show with me today. Karen, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me again, Jim.
Yeah, I know. So we had such a good conversation last time, and that when I was looking at people to invite for the Cherish and Conquer podcast, I mean, you were tops on my list. That's for darn sure. So,
Thank you.
you're more than welcome, and it's an honor to have you here. Now, but before we get into our good discussion in regards to your journey and your experiences, if you could tell the watchers and listeners, a little bit about how you're actually making a difference in the lives of the people that you work with today.
So I've had this mission for a long, long time. I didn't know it right away. It was always in the background, but when I finally got clear about my mission, I was in my 30s, and it was that work doesn't have to be as miserable and hard and soulless as a lot of people experience at work. And so I was going to do everything in my power to erase that in as many locations and corners of the earth as possible. And so that began the journey of building, more humanistic workplaces and better operations that weren't as painful to try to navigate as an employee and also experience as a customer. And the company can also earn more profit. It actually, you can have it all, and it's a win-win-win when you do it right. So that's kind of where it all started from. And then we've, evolved with consulting, and then we have an online learning platform to teach others how to do what we do. And it feels really good to be fulfilling that mission.
Well, okay. So when you say what you are working on and how you're making a difference, I mean, that was a very, very broad scope. So I'm sitting here and thinking, okay, but how do you do that, Karen? Because
Yeah.
I heard HR, I heard ops, there's several different elements, and also customer experience. So if you can kind of peel it back a little bit to give us a better understanding.
Yeah. So first of all, in order to create a high-performing organization that allow people to thrive and grow and develop and customers to have a great experience, it is multifaceted. There is not one place that you focus. You have to focus on all the places. You don't do it all at once, obviously, but you have to start somewhere and get that slate. So HR, for example, you have to create an organization where you can attract and retain the best talent. And you do that by actually improving the operations so people want to work there, and you're respectful to them. You provide lots of opportunities for growth and development, and you also have work that isn't just monumentally painful to do. And there's all kinds of things that make an organization more attractive to a candidate, especially top performers. So yeah, it starts there, but then there's all those elements of getting the operation well honed, and so process design, work system design, work environment culturally. There's all of that. So when we work with organizations on the consulting side of things, the first thing we do is figure out where it hurts the most and where we can make the greatest impact the most quickly. And sometimes that's on the hiring side of things. Sometimes that's the operational design piece. Sometimes it's just pure customer service and getting their customer service muscles well honed so that their customers are more happy, and then they're able to get more revenue because the customers are happier, and then that helps fuel more hiring and all those things. It really, having a well-run machine in business, and the bigger the business, the harder it is. It's hard work. Really hard work. And you have to start with a desire to have it, and then you have to just be ready for the long haul. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Okay, so you and I had a discussion prior to us sitting here at this moment, and we talked about even some of the pivots that you've made within your own business, because you're not that huge organization, and you said something about how you've had to go about doing work differently. And so if you could give us a little bit of understanding on how you've had to make certain transitions in order for you to, because I would dare to say, if you don't do that, what you had talked about as far as being in the workplace and having to be, drudgery, that happens too when you have your own business.
Right, right. I mean, and I have to practice what I preach, or I would be a fraud. So one thing that I can't emphasize enough, and this is kind of the wonky, boring, drudgery, nitty gritty part of having any business, any industry, any service, any product, any whatever it might be. You have to have documented processes, but there's a way to document them. There's a lot of really poorly documented work out there, and there's a whole lot of not documented at all. And it's all tribal knowledge. People come in and they learn from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone. And so when they walk out the door, your operating manual goes out the door as well. So we spend an enormous amount of time, and it's not fun. I have to admit, the first time you sit down to document a process, it isn't really fun, but man, when you get it done, it's like, woo, because you can onboard more quickly, you can pivot more quickly and make improvements. People don't have to struggle to figure out what they should be doing and what good looks like. It's documented. And so your learning curve when you have new hires is much, much more quick. To get them up to a high proficiency. And there's just all kinds of benefits to, it's like taking your vitamins or exercising. You might not like that, that machine that makes you sore, but man, you look good, you feel good, you're healthier. So it's that kind of thing. So that's one thing that we're pretty anal about is, documenting our processes the minute they change. And yeah, so that was a pivot from thinking, a small company, maybe we don't have to have that level of formality. Yes, you do.
Myrina.ai draws inspiration from the legendary Amazonian Queen Marina, embodying resilience and strategic brilliance. With our AI-powered SaaS platform, we equip women-led businesses for success in the evolving landscape of AI and business automation. As a partner and community for female-led businesses, Myrina.ai maximizes their potential using AI while providing essential support. Ready to amplify your success using AI with like-minded ladies? Register or learn more at Myrina.ai. And now, back to our interview.
Yeah, and I'll have to share with you because you said something that I kind of got a chuckle about. So I coach high school baseball. And I was talking about something that I like to study and get really excited about, and I said the word anal, and they kind of looked at me crossways, and I was like,
Yeah,
because they didn't know what that meant, and
yeah, they didn't know it, obsessive.
yeah, that's right, and so it's like so for you that are listening and watching and really aren't familiar with that phrase, it's geeking out, right? We geek out on that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
There's downsides to that too, though, and this is what I want to explore a little bit, because we're kind of experiencing it right now with the explosion of artificial intelligence when you start thinking about process and workflows and all of that. And if you think about a SOP, a standard operating procedure, and documenting, all of those procedures, that's now kind of set. And I may not, because, hey, I'm just following the process. I may not look for opportunities where we can actually improve the process by doing an automation, or maybe even just re-engineering the entire process because something has changed. So how do we account for, okay, we celebrated, we got the process, and now we're following it, and guess what? That thing's now outdated, and it's a couple months down the road, and we didn't even realize it.
Mm-hmm. So, in the world I operate in, we have this kind of mantra about seeking perfection, not waiting for perfection, but always, always seeking it. You can always make a process better. Always. There's no such thing as perfection with processes. And so the culture has to be one that's kind of hungry for that constant improvement. And the leaders have to encourage it. Workers need to have time to do it. If you don't have any time to think and be innovative, no one's going to think and be innovative. So you have to get away from the grind to actually keep working in the business. Working on the business as much as you're working in the business. There's a big difference. And so leaders really have to drive that. And then when the people are coming up with ideas, you have to have a, kind of set of game rules where it isn't an immediate, we can't do that because it's learning how to ask questions like, interesting. What would we have to do in order to make that happen? What would have to be true to see that become reality? And those kinds of questions. And that's a cultural transformation to get people, because remember, people have been in a lot of organizations where it's not safe to even make a suggestion. They get, slapped down, and there's no psychological safety there. And they're coming with that baggage into your organization. And so you have to, set up a constant and clear and candid dialogue about the desire to have that kind of ongoing improvement and not be threatened by it either.
Well, and I think that's a really important thing to explore when you start talking about, threatened by it. Because when you start looking at, say, the maturation cycle of organizations. So I have my startup, I have my baby, as we refer to it as, and I've, worked very hard in order to grow it. And then it gets to a certain point, and I may be the one that's prohibiting it from going to that next step or that next level. So you had mentioned something about, the culture, but ultimately it's the owner that, is the one who's in charge of that culture and driving that culture. So how do you work with somebody who essentially has difficulty with, giving up the reins or giving up the control so that somebody else can take it over, even if a process has been documented and they are the ones who actually did it?
Right. Yeah, I call it founderitis. Founderitis. It depends on the person, on how we work with them. So if we have someone that seems to have a pretty good spirit and heart, they are respectful toward people. They've got that personality where, they really do want to develop people. They maybe have a habit of not doing that, but they want to. The desire is there. It's different from someone who is a curmudgeon and wants to control everything, and they were born that way and they'll probably die that way. And, and those are people that we really can't work with. And so fortunately, there are more on the malleable. Yes, I want our people to be, I want to sleep at night. I don't want to have to be the one working, 70, 80 hours a week. There's a lot of those. So that's good. And so you just, I come from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're very candid, very frank, but not mean. It's always out of love. Well, not always, not everybody does that, but it's supposed to be out of love, and so you just start with a candid conversation of, what do you want to achieve? What kind of life do you want to have? How do you want your people to be serving your customers, and how do you want them to be helping you grow the business, assuming they want to grow, and things like that, and get them to articulate what that future looks like, and then compare it and contrast it with the current state. And now you have a defined gap to be closed. And then it's easier for them to be a participant in that because they're the ones that have identified it. I haven't identified it. I've seen it, but I didn't identify it. They did, so that's the way to get a founder or owner, to open their minds to something different from the current state.
And as you say that, it's almost like creating that and developing that and having, somewhat of, I guess you'd say, structure around that. Is that something that they would also want to absolutely communicate internally so that people kind of know where they're coming from?
If they're a structured person, they can communicate it. Sometimes it takes, having a second in command or a joined at the hip co-worker, that's with the founder owner, that's able to be the voice for that, the voice for structure. There are people that are visionaries, and every owner is different. There are people that are very operationally, and I call them, process geeks like I am. And there are people that are highly visionary and can't stand process, that are owning companies. And, I'm not into square pegs into round holes. I'm into finding a square peg and a round peg, putting them together, and being able to kind of play off each other and make the environment what it needs to be, because they both have their strengths and they both have their areas that maybe they're not good at them. Maybe they just don't like it. So that helps a lot, to have people in your circle that can fill in for the areas that maybe an owner's not really thrilled to be doing.
Okay. So then I'm starting to think about, and there's different ways that it's referred to when you start talking about assessing. I mean, you could say, pillars, competencies. I mean, there's all kinds of different flavors of that. How do you help an owner understand and, to identify or self-assess and self-identify, where their potential risk components or elements are, and that they do need to find, somebody to actually fill that in because it's necessary?
Sometimes it's a formal assessment. If they've never been through things like Myers-Briggs or Enneagrams, I love Enneagrams, anything like that that can help someone see themselves for who they are, how they're wired. That's a start. If they have been through all of that, then a lot of times it's more a matter of just talking through what a day in the life of, let's say the owner's name is, Joe. A day in the life of Joe, a week in the life of Joe, a month in the life of Joe, a quarter in the life of Joe, and just talking through what are they doing, what are they frustrated by, what are they happy with, and you can figure it out pretty quickly. Actually, if I've been doing this for a long time, but it's pretty easy for people to like relax and let their guard down and talk about what bugs them and what they love, and that right there it just speaks volumes to what they're good at.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had talked about your pivot and some of the things that you have done, and I think some of that is like you talked about creating online learning and things like that. But if I started thinking about that impact and that scalability, how much has doing that allowed you and your organization to help more people?
Well, just sheer numbers prove that we're able to help a lot more. So, on the consulting firm side, I never wanted to get huge. I wanted to be a boutique, a very tailored consulting firm, not a cookie cutter. We got this program for you. You're going to love it. We are very situationally based. What is the need? And we're going to help you figure it out. And then we're going to help you fill it. And so there was a limit to how fast we could grow if we wanted to be that kind of high touch, very situational consulting firm. You don't scale really well with everything being unique. So the learning side of things on the platform is right there. Is really good. The other thing though I'll say is that what's been interesting, and this is for all the entrepreneurs listening, I thought in my heart of hearts that it was going to be two different companies. In fact, they are separate corporations. There's the consulting and there's the online learning. And yet almost daily customers are wanting both. And I didn't really see them as two products. And now the further we get away from COVID, the pandemic, the more they want both. It used to be that online learning was all you could get because nobody was allowed to touch each other and be in the same room and all those things. But now we're seeing lots of demand for in-person work. And so I think an entrepreneur, if they want to really scale and keep growing their business, needs to think about, kind of relational products or services that seem very different, but might actually complement, and you might sell both to every client or customer. And that becomes a really great way to grow the business financially as well.
Okay, so that may bring what you're talking about, some people to a different perspective when you apply the thinking around work-life balance, right? So if because to me we talked about not having that 70 to 80 hour work week and operationalizing and things like that, but you just maybe have put the 70 to 80 hours back in the mix if I need to do.
I did. Yeah, I did. I didn't mean I don't work 70 to 80 hours a week. But here's the thing about that. Like, the way to get away from that 70 to 80 hour work week is, first of all, have enough years behind you that you can relax into it. Because when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting, you should be working 70, 80 hours a week. You're probably not going to make it if you're not working that hard. It's hard work starting a business. And so that's one thing. And the way to get away from that is to hire staff, but you have to have money to hire staff. And so you have to be really smart about growing the business to fund the business. It's like, the chicken and the egg. And I'm this close. I think by the end of this year, and I'm in year 5 of the academy, the online learning, which is way more effort on the proportion of my days, way more on the academy than it is on the consulting right now. And by the end of this year, I'll have 5. Well, I'm an employee also, so 6 of us plus 15 1099 contractors. And that's when I feel like I have enough people to delegate to and have enough coverage that I can actually take a vacation.
At the core of Myrina.ai is customization and the innovative AI you process, which uses AI to infuse your personality, style, and vision into cloning you and growing your business. Are you ready to amplify your success using AI with a community of fellow female entrepreneurs? Go to Myrina.ai today. And now, back to the interview.
But right now, I couldn't take a vacation. There's no way. I mean, and we're still growing the business. We're still figuring out how to operate. We're still changing our processes pretty frequently as we meet new customers with new needs and things like that. And I haven't had a vacation in 5 years. Now, part of that was COVID, but but most of it was just I can't yet, and I can't wait until I can. But that's. I mean, if you watch Shark Tank and listen to Mark Cuban talk about the grind of starting, if you really want to be an entrepreneur, you can have a small business and you can stay, and there's nothing wrong with having a certain growth goal and getting there and staying there. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not mine, but there's nothing. And if you want to grow and you want to build something that spreads whatever skill you have broadly, it's going to be a grind for a few years.
Okay, then I have to ask, what do you consider work-life balance for you?
Well, for me, one of the things that I am very fortunate at is I can turn off as fast as I can turn on. So, I work really long hours, but man, when I'm done, I am done. I've always had that. And some people call it compartmentalizing, but sometimes compartmentalizing is a bad thing because it means you can kind of be insular and not be thinking about the outside world and too kind of internal. That's not my form of compartmentalizing. It's more practical. It's like, I need rest. I need to sleep. I need to eat, so it's more kind of self-preservation, compartmentalizing. And then when I'm on. And I wake up very early. I'm usually in the office by 4:30. And so, but when I go to bed at 9, I'm done. So, that's one. I don't know how to teach that. I think that might be hardwiring. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is I can't emphasize enough the power of yoga, breathing. It doesn't have to be a big deal. You can have a 15-minute break between calls and do, a couple down dogs, couple up dogs, do a little balancing tree poses, breathe a little, breathe into the diaphragm. And when you get on the next call, you're completely fresh. So it's, that's a skill that helps get through long days.
So it sounds like, for the most part, you're doing a lot of work in regards to managing of your time and time management.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's not much time left in the day. I mean, to be honest right now, but the time that's left in the day, I do protect it. And I do, I garden a little bit. I like that a lot. I like getting my hands dirty, literally. And I also love baths. I think they're so much more relaxing than showers. I like it to a buffet versus a sit down dinner at a restaurant. The buffet, you have to work. A shower, you have to work. I have to stand up. A bath, I can relax. So, I love baths, and I get some of my best ideas in the bath.
Hey, I mean, I think, finding where you could, be your optimal, whatever optimal is for you. It is really important to kind of keep some of your, I guess, sanity in check. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of hit on this a little bit, but I want to put it in context. So what inspired you to start your own business, and how does it align with the concept of Cherish and Conquer?
Ooh, so my family I was a science and math geek, and I was going to become a doctor or something like that. And so my whole family were into business. My dad had a couple companies. My brother had his first company at 18. My mother was a buyer for a children's clothing store. So they were very business oriented and pretty entrepreneurial as well. And so I didn't even know I had that bug. Because my guidance counselors told me I should go into math and science. I followed I'm a good rule follower at times. I break them too, but I'm a pretty good rule follower. And so that's the path I took. And my undergrad is microbiology. Who knew? You know, and so when I ended up getting into business, I got into business on the technology side, like the technical side, math and science, and then I started looking at operations, and I just lit up like a light bulb, and just like, oh, I love this. I love process design, and and my family, we have a heavy both Scottish and German background. And so we had a little bit of rigidity and discipline and formality and things, the German part of our background. So like we were fanatics. There was a checklist to go on vacation. There was a checklist for the grocery store. There was a checklist for packing. There was And so I grew up with checklists, and I am still to this day a checklist fanatic. And so I had that hardwiring. So I think that there's a lot about who you are and how you're hardwired from a child that will lend you toward a path. So I think this business path was a path I probably was supposed to be on all along, but it just took me a minute to get there. So that's my thought.
Well, I mean, and that's very helpful. And I, have been podcasting for over a decade, and for me, I always want to get into the discussions about what you were just referring to, my background and where I came from. And it's just phenomenal to see and hear, people tell their story about how they are making an impact in other people's lives today, and how much the connection is so strong, to their upbringing.
Right. So you asked about Cherish and Conquer and that tie. And so one of the things I was intrigued when I saw that this was the name of your podcast now, I was intrigued with how you came up with it, and like what was behind it from your perspective, because the word conquer is kind of interesting. Like cherish is a very, loving, positive, warm, where conquer, is kind of the opposite of that. It has this male energy and this, also, maybe even war comes to mind or anything. Now that's not how I view conquer, but that I think is the lion's share. People out there, when they hear the word conquer, it has like a hardness to it. So what I was thinking, I want to try this on and see if this means anything, if this is what you meant. When I think about conquer, like people say to me, what's your goal with the Academy? I said global domination. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean I'm going to like step over competitors and I'm going to, be slimy with sales and get whatever I can. I mean, I want everyone to be able to experience this amazing workplace. I want leaders to be able to sleep at night. I want customers to be really, really happy with every service or product they get from someone. I want employees to walk into work and come out at the end of the day, or through the computer at the end of the day, if they're remote, feeling even more energized, not less. And that's what I want. And that's what I mean by global domination. So what do you mean by conquer?
To me, and this is going back to having the opportunity to interview hundreds of people over the past couple of years, is I don't like to frame it from my perspective. I want to hear what other people perceive and think, and how it actually connects and resonates with them. Because conquer could mean everything from, me having, the fear, of doing certain things. It could be, overcoming, especially with female entrepreneurs, gender bias. It could,
Yeah.
there's so many different factors that go into play. Much like you said, the guidance counselor telling you should go in a particular path. It was a conquering scenario or situation that you actually, came to where you are today and didn't go that path. So it's just I think that's what's so important, is because oftentimes we get stuck in our own perception of what things are, that we don't think about alternatives. And we need to hear that.
Yeah, what you just stimulated in my mind was also this notion of you need to really know yourself, know thyself, so that when you realize that something isn't a good fit, like in my case, math and science, although I still love math and science, but it wasn't where I wanted to spend the bulk of my time. You recognize it. And I do think that female business women and entrepreneurs and things like that do have a tougher road at that, because we're, depending on your age, especially people that are a little bit older, are socialized to not be business people. And, in all kinds of subtle and not so subtle ways, but a lot of subtle ways that are actually more damaging than the not so subtle ways. And so I think you do need to conquer the just all the paradigms that are out there about what people should be and what they should do. So,
Right.
and so there's a lot of conquering that goes along with it. I actually love the name of this podcast. I think it's very apt.
Thank you very much. And as for me, I love, like I said, the human interest side of it and where people are coming from, because, I've had people share with me some of the most phenomenal things associated with human understanding, emotional intelligence skills and all of that, and learning what their background was. It's like, I could see how. it's,
Yeah.
it's just really,
Yeah.
and knowing thyself and when you just start thinking about that can be quite, different and complex. And so you mentioned something about kind of finding your place in your 30s. I think, for me, I could say that I'm probably still doing the work, but I didn't start hitting that and understanding that a little bit better until I was in my 40s. And why? There's probably numerous reasons for that.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone has their pace. And, as long as you're always learning and growing and, it doesn't matter what age it starts clicking, as long as it starts clicking because you want it to click. You want to figure out what you're here for and what your purpose on earth is and things like that. So it's, you have to be open to it, and open to taking lots of feedback, and lots of cues, to figure out what that really is. And listening, I always say, it's just so important to listen to your heart and what's making you go, I don't know about this, versus, that it's so subtle sometimes. And the more you can listen to that, it gives you all the cues you need to know where you should be and what you should be doing.
Well, and as you say that, I start thinking about some people that are just pleasers and they want to please everyone. So when they get the feedback, they want to take that information and therefore make changes based off of it because of the person who provided it for whatever reason. I mean, it could be someone close to them or even not close to them, just someone who they, have some respect for that has influence over them.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to somebody who has struggles associated with that?
So first of all, I think it's important to dive into why. Why is someone wired current state as a pleaser? Because if you go back and look at your early childhood, maybe even early school days, maybe even early job days, you might find a lot of the answers to why you got habituated. And it is just a habit. It's a mental model, a mental habit to want to please. And so that's important to know the roots of that. And then the next thing is to once again be like super present on when things are happening, to get better tuned into whether you want to do that or you really don't want to do it. You think you should. So to me, should is almost the worst cuss word there is. Like the word should be banned, like it's a bad word. And so that is all kinds of laced with expectations and, mores and values, someone else's values and all those things. So if you start thinking, well, I really should do that. That right there is like, woo, woo, woo. That's a dangerous place. And so becoming tuned into it is the first thing. And then the next thing is just being brave and starting to not do what someone says you should do, and learn that the world is not going to come crashing down around you. Like the sky is not going to fall. When you're true to yourself, beautiful things happen. And then once you live that a couple times, you're like, oh, it was okay. It may have been awkward or, a little uncomfortable, and I've lost friendships over not doing what people thought I should do. And they turned out to be fairly toxic friendships that I needed to get rid of. And so that should word is a great guide for being tuned into something's not right. Something ain't right.
When you say that, it hits a certain spot for me because, there's a few people who, well, let's just say, are part of blood, that you have a discussion with them, and typically it starts with, well, you know what you should do.
Yeah, yeah. You have to take a big patience pill before you get into those conversations. They don't know any better. Although there are subtle ways that you can start trying to put a little bit of a subtle mirror in front of people that do that. That's pretty disrespectful to do that, actually. But most people don't realize that that's disrespectful that do it because they're not thinking that way. So we do it when we're coaching leaders. We do it all the time. We call them out on that because it's just respectful. It's not honoring the person and not asking any questions. That's the other thing. It just drives me crazy when someone just assumes something that, is my reality that isn't even close to my reality. And that they're telling me I should be doing something based on something that isn't even close to my reality. So it's like, you want to ask a couple questions to see what the real truth is. So, but I think it's really important. And I'm going to go back to the people pleaser thing. So I will never forget. I got married very young, 22 years old, just barely 22. And when I knew my marriage was in trouble in about 2.5 years, I knew that I married a really, really nice guy, great provider. He would be a great father. And he turned out, he was a father to another woman's children. And everyone said he was just such a great father. He would all that, but he just wasn't for me as far as how you spend your spare time, how you spend money. All those things were all misaligned. Religion, everything was politics, everything was misaligned. And I bought the book, When I Say No, I Feel Guilty. It was a big bestseller in the 80s. And he saw that book on the the nightstand and said, "Uh-oh, we're in trouble." And I didn't say anything at the time, but we were in trouble at that point. And that book, as kind of dorky as it is and everything, it really changed my life. It changed my way of thinking, and I forget who the author is of that, but it was a really good book. It still is. So if anyone out there is a people pleaser that wants to kind of challenge that, that's a good book to start with. And I'm pretty sure it's still in print, which is shocking from the 80s.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you say that. There was somebody who I don't think I was in conversation with, but I may have heard him on a podcast or something like that, where he said that he actually doesn't read anything in the 20th century because every script and everything that was written prior to that covers everything that is now being written or has been written in the past 100 years.
Yeah, that's wise. I think I agree. Yeah.
So it's been covered, and arguably you could say that they probably had more time studying it than we do.
Yeah. Well, like Andrew Carnegie, I think it was Andrew Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Oh my God, that is such a great book. And then also Stephen Covey had the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That is just classic. And in my world, operations design and quality, W. Edwards Deming and Peter Drucker, they wrote things that are being repackaged all the time with a new ribbon on it. So that's actually pretty wise to think about that. Not read anything current.
To me, it made me want to go back and look at some older publishings to see what I may have been missing. And I think that component and element of curiosity, what you had hit on several times, is one of those things that it has to be part of the daily effort and activity, because that goes into that creative thinking and innovation process. And I think you have to schedule time for it. My problem is I schedule time for it and go way overboard.
Yeah, you mean you can't get reconnected to whatever you were supposed to be on, or
That's correct. I go down the curiosity hole. That's for darn.
Well, it's a better hole to go down than many of the other holes you could go down, because curiosity really does. I mean, if you want to be a constant learner, you have to be curious. You can't be kind of black and white and no, it's this way and all that stuff. You have to be really curious in order to have this ongoing learning every minute of every day.
Very true. Can you share an example of a time when staying true to your principles led to a significant achievement or breakthrough in your business?
Yes, I think of a couple. I was like, what's the best one to share? So one of the things in consulting that is important to get to, but in the early practical days when you have a mortgage to pay, you'll say yes to lots of things. And that's not being a people pleaser. It's being practical and trying to get enough income to make a living, to pay your bills. And so, when your bills are paid, you're free to innovate, and you're more free to be creative and, do the things that then build the business. So it's an important thing to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's that health and food and all that stuff. Pay your bills. That's an important one. And so I started being very aware of the kinds of consulting projects that made me like excited and giddy and really love working with the client, and the kinds are like, ugh, oh my gosh, pins in my eyes. And so the more I got clear on that, the more I started saying no to engagements and no to clients, regardless of the kind of work they wanted me to do, but no to the environment, no to a particular leader, no, like all that stuff. And once I got to that place, I was a no making machine. And that's when my business started to thrive, because I was manifesting yes, 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 and saying no, no, no. And you have to have a savings account in order to get to that point, usually, because you're going to say no to income, and so you have to have that nest egg to get you through that. But man, once you get to it, it is just crazy how much business comes your way, and that's from clarifying what you really want to do. So I wrote a book, and I'm obsessed with clarity first, and once you get clear on anything, you just manifest it. If when you're not getting what you think you want, you're not clear enough about it, or you're not sure enough. You're not consistently putting it out there. Like the world will respond when you are prepared to get what it's going to give you, and you have to get prepared by being clear and consistent in putting it out there. I want. This is what I want to do. This is what I want. These are the kinds of clients I want. These kind of projects I want. Like all of that. It's really, I learned this from one of my friends, Tina, and I was like, man, you just declare something and it happens. She goes, that's manifestation. And I was like, teach me how. And it's just easy. Get clear. It's like, well, okay. So it's very powerful.
Well, when you say that, and that's how we first met, is by you promoting that book, I start thinking about the need to get also very good at expectation setting.
Mm-hmm.
So how much work are you putting into constructing the proper expectations, delivering the expectations, and then living through that expectation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised it. It's really important. And especially with customer expectations and client, in the case of a consulting client expectations. So the whole caveating thing becomes really important. Caveating means that you're saying, yes, but don't expect this kind of thing. And it can't be a bunch of excuses. It needs to be situationally authentic because of whatever. So for example, when clients ask for some kind of a problem to be solved that they have, and you know enough about the problem now that you know what you would suggest for a countermeasure or a solution to that problem. So you suggest that, you propose that to the client. And very often the client will say either, well, I'm sorry, we don't have 4 days to work on that. You only have 1 day. I'm sorry, you can't get these people. You only get these people. Like whatever it is, then I've gotten pretty consistent at saying, well, all right, so there's a reason why I am saying that it should be done this way. I have lots of experience, blah, blah, blah. If you aren't able to accommodate that, then here's what you can expect to get at the end of this, because we didn't have that. And so as long as you set their and if they agree to it, then they don't have any right to, and they usually don't go, well, you didn't, blah, 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 because you were setting that expectation. And so I think expectation setting is so important in life, not just business, but in life. So that, because I think most of the angst we have in relationships is because of mismatched expectations.
Again, you're making me chuckle because it's hitting home. Is I'll have that type of conversation, especially with my kids, because I'm like, well, this is what is expected, and if something like that doesn't happen, if you don't go through with that, then this is what you can expect. And like, why are you always threatening us? I said, I'm just giving you the truth. These are realities. I said, do you want the information that you can face it and decide now? Or do you want the surprise on the back end?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the parenting part of this. So I raised 11 and 13-year-old came into my life, and they left my life at 22 and 24, I think it was. And I remember they had not been taught, or even no one even said anything to them about life being a series of choices. So I'm like the choice queen. And it's like, you can get this. And my mom was my mom used to actually take a piece of gum, a stick of gum, and have one person break it in half and the other person choose.
Yes.
It's like, she was obsessed with choice. And so, so it's a matter of, you can do this or that, you could do this or that, you can do this or that. And then if it's not something where I can define or should define, I love, especially teens, well, what are your choices? And have them define it, go, okay, well, which of those choices do you think you should take? And why do you think you should take that choice? And getting people, indoctrinated kids especially, as early as possible into life as a series of choices, and you have to take responsibility for your choice, but it's your choice. It's not it shouldn't be someone else's choice. There's the word shouldn't be someone else's choice. It should be your choice. And then, you live with the consequences of that choice. So it's I'm glad that you're having those conversations with your kids.
Well, they don't like it, but and I do.
They will thank you. They may not like it right now, but they will thank you.
And for me, thinking about at one time, I had over 800, people that were under me. I don't know how to say that right. That had to report up through me.
Right.
And I learned that I needed to do that and be, more inquisitive and help them come to their own conclusions, because, and this is what I say all the time. I'd mentioned something about I coach baseball. Is I tell my pitchers, and I said, because I'm a pitching coach, as I said, one of my objectives is to teach you how to think, not what to think. Because if I teach you what to think, you're going to be looking for me for all the answers. And let me tell you what, when you're out there on the pitcher's mound and you're carrying the load, I can't help you.
Right. You're inching into the coaching aspect of, adulthood, whether it's in business or in coaching a sport or at home or whatever. And so there are a couple coaching books that I really love and this was actually a big pivot of mine. I was a bit of a teller. And I think anyone, from what I've seen, anyone who operates at a pretty high level of proficiency often has this bad habit of telling people instead of coaching it out of them and having them form their own conclusions and things like that. So that was actually a huge pivot for me to learn how to do that. And it takes longer. It's a little bit longer to get people. It's like, teaching a kid how to do something versus you doing it for themselves or yourself. They're going to take a little bit longer, but they're going to be a high functioning adult at the end of that. And whereas they wouldn't if you do everything for them. And so it's really important to use questions that start with what and how, so that you're getting not a binary response, but a thoughtful, and it becomes habit, a more and more and more and more thoughtful response, so that they're, building those critical thinking skills. And why is also a good one, but why, you have to be kind of careful. It can come off kind of finger pointing and blamey. So I often will, up front of why, I will often say something like, I'm not asking this from a blame perspective. I'm asking this out of pure curiosity. Why did that happen? Or why do you think that happened? Or why did that person do it that way? Those kinds of things. But it's a tricky question. What and how are way more powerful.
Most definitely.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. So now we have our breakthrough blitz time here, Karen. So I'm going to ask you a few questions to help us all be able to hopefully break through. Are you ready to blitz?
Yes, I am.
All right, here we go. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
Checklist.
Why did I suspect that? What's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Bath, yoga.
Yeah, you already said that, so thanks for sharing that again.
Oh, Chardonnay sometimes too.
That's a plus. If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
Oh my God, there's so many. Lori Greiner from Shark Tank.
What's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
Go slow to go fast.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to aspiring female entrepreneurs?
Never give up.
Okay, so here's our final Breakthrough Blitz question. What's the biggest misconception people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. There's so many. Well, thankfully now it's so much better. It is so much better. When I first started, we were still in that very polarizing thing about, women can't be bossy, they can't speak their mind, they can't blah, 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 all that stuff. And so, that was a lot to handle, all that put the woman in their box thing. So that, I think we're getting through it, and we're not through it, but we're getting through it. I think now the challenge is making sure that a woman operates as fairly as absolutely possible and is constantly challenging their way of interfacing with people. So what I mean by that is, because we are, and this is overgeneralizing perhaps, but it is somewhat of a generalization that has a lot of truth. We tend to be nurturers, and so a lot of female leaders tend to nurture their team. And I see a lot of cases where it tends to get a little dysfunctional, where they're moving into a little bit more of a mom role. And, most women are never going to take the mom hat off. Even if you were never a true mom, like with a baby, you were mom to the world, mom to, teams, mom to pets, we're momdoms. And so I think that it's really important to be able to support and help people without crossing that line into being too maternal. And it's a hard one. So I think that'll help everyone do better, and it'll help men view women in a better light also.
Karen, I appreciate this. Yeah. So how do the watchers and listeners get in touch with you?
So TKMG, we used to be the Karen Martin Group, and I wanted to take myself out of the limelight as I was growing, but TKMG is the Karen Martin Group. So TKMG.com and TKMGacademy.com is our online learning platform. And LinkedIn, I'm Karen Martin OpX, and love to meet everyone.
Karen Martin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.marina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.